what's important, okay, at that information asset, and we understood where it was processed, stored, or transmitted, okay, and then applied the zero trust theory to that, then we're on track. But wrestling an architecture down to zero trust and then opening up a GitHub and putting your new, your new SDLC project in there, it just doesn't make sense. And yet that's what we are doing.
Welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. This is Darren Pulsford, Chief Solution Architect, author, and most importantly, your host. On this episode, cyber technology cannot hide bad risk management, with special guest Richard Hollis, Director at RiskCrew. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Darren. Thanks for having me. Big fan of the podcast, and I've been really looking forward to this. Thank you for the invitation.
Hey, well, thanks for being a listener. I appreciate it, Richard. And if I had sponsors, they would appreciate it too. So maybe someday I'll get sponsors. So, Richard, before we dive into cybersecurity and process and people and technology, my podcast, right? People, process, technology. Let's hear a little bit about Richard Hollis. Who is he? Why is he here? The man behind the legend, right? Let's hear it.
Well, I fall into the people part of that, people, process, and technology. Darren, what am I? I'm a cybersecurity risk and compliance manager right now. I'm running a company called RiskCrew out here in London. I'm an American living and working in Europe, have been for about 20 years. But I'm running a product agnostic firm. We do consulting. We do everything from risk assessments to policies, procedures, training and awareness. And then the other side of the company is the geeky side that does penetration testing and red team testing and IoT and AI things. Anyway, but my approach as a professional, and therefore the approach of the company, has always been, it's process first, product second. Cybersecurity, products are definitely part of the answer, but they're not the answer. So we kind of preach the gospel according to, it's not the firewall, it's the configuration, the maintenance, the managing, the patching, the monitoring, etc. So it's that process part of, which is why I like your podcast, by the way, because it resonates with a cybersecurity professional like me that thinks it's the emphasis is process. So that is the kind of guy I am. I'm a big picture song and dance risk and compliance manager. Have been for about 30 years. So long in tooth, gray in hair, but I've been doing this for about 30 years before we were even calling it cybersecurity. I started out in the government over in Washington, D.C., doing what wasn't even called computer security at the time with Wangs. It was been that long ago, and then came over to Europe and eventually started about right around 2000, right around the millennium, and the big when the millennium bug and spam was
the biggest
the
Y2K,
computer. Yeah, exactly. That was the issues. But we always saw cybersecurity on an application level and kind of opened the doors doing things like application penetration testing. And then we got into GRC, compliance management, ISO, and SOC 2, and PCI, and this kind of thing. But my perspective has always been a big product. I guess because I've been so long in the industry, I'm a bit of a cynic. I've seen technology come and go, and I've seen, it's always been technology first, cybersecurity second, technology first, and we've been a bolt-on, which has been my basic, whine and moan throughout my career. Is it's always technology first, and then we think about security second. So we're, second on the scene, and we're a patch to some, to cloud or to Wi-Fi or to whatever, technology we're trying to get our grips and understand what the risks are associated with it. So I've spent, I guess, I'm articulating a career of 30 years saying, I told you so. And then, and then it happens and you're like, I wish you would have listened to me up front, but no, it's, I've got a long-term view of the industry. And as such, I think I hear myself speak recently, and I come across as fairly cynical because I haven't seen us do a lot of things right. So anyway, that's who I am. That's my view.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, you know that process is king when it comes to cybersecurity. Basic blocking and tackling fundamentals of cybersecurity. Do you think that this whole, um, what's the right word? The whole hype around zero trust is getting us back to. In fact, I really don't like the name zero trust architecture. It should be zero trust principles. Do you think that the whole hype around zero trust architecture or principles, are they getting us back to the basics of fundamental cybersecurity best practices, or have they just packaged up a bunch of technology and tied a bow on it and said, "Hey, this is better than it was before"?
Yeah, which is probably why I gave you the big long preamble about being a bit cynical. I'm a member of large organizations that have founded the idea, the principle, apparently of but here's my view is that at this point, Darren, where we are it is the fundamental. So I heartily say it is the best. Zero trust is just makes sense to me. Nothing can be trusted. Cybersecurity is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a secure computer. Never was, never will be. And throughout my profession, that's the kind of gospel I've been saying. So along comes cyber trust, which is a sort of an I appreciate and understand and appreciate the architectural implementation of zero trust, right? But then when we start to get into product, I yield as me, and quite frankly, as running a small consultancy as I do, we're 15, we're 15 technologists and about another 10 risk guys. So a small company of 20 people, and I'm walking through clients through zero trust, and quite frankly, it is too cumbersome. It is when you apply this technology, the theory behind it is great, and the philosophy behind it is trust no one is absolutely dead on. But when you try to implement that through technology, it becomes too cumbersome, and also I don't know anybody who's done it successfully on a large architecture. And so I've looked at other things. Sorry, just to finish I like SAPSA, which is secure by design and lining up where your information assets are, and protecting those accordingly. And I see that's far simpler and easy to apply to a large architecture.
Okay, so that's where I wanted to get to. If I have where do I start for you to make as secure as I can? Because, like you said, security is kind of an oxymoron. We're just doing risk avoidance or risk mitigation, right?
So where you start?
So where do I start? Where do I start?
So where do you start? Is the problem is that few of us have a luxury of starting. We already have an inherited architecture. Now that could be a cloud platform, or that could be your old bricks and mortars. But at the end of the day, it's like walking into somebody else's house and saying, "How do I start to secure this?" You have to work with what you have, and so therefore, zero trust can be very easy architecture to deploy on something you already have. But if you're building from scratch, Darren, I think if you had a whiteboard and asked me where you started, you'd start from a risk assessment. That's what guys like me say. What am I trying to protect? Why am I trying to protect it? What's going to happen to me if I fail? You understand where your information assets are. You understand the value, the criticality, and the location, and you build to limit on need to know, to limit access to those information assets that if you lost them, they could impact your organization. And so that logic of less is more and need to know access has been lost through the years. And by applying things like zero trust, we think everybody needs to have the same access on this architecture. And I don't believe that. I've never seen an organization where need to know is actively enforced on an architecture. And the people in marketing only have access to the marketing information, and HR only the HR, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we try to do is so if I could whiteboard it, and I mentioned SAPSA, this open architecture, for me, that just makes sense to be able to look at what you have, understand where the assets are, and then if you need to move them to minimize the risk, that's what we should be doing, is moving the information assets on the architecture rather than, planning the whole security across the whole architecture.
So this is really interesting what you said, because you emphasized a couple key elements that we talk about in zero trust architecture. First is data. You mentioned data first, and
Yep.
then you mentioned identity and access
Yes.
to data. So I think it's fascinating that you said data first, because a lot of people spend all this time securing devices and not
Correct.
securing data.
And absolutely. And the game is keep your eye on the data. It's the data that's important. It's the data that threat actors want. The access, yes, access to what? The data. And so, treating everybody the same by multi-factor authentication. And, once they come on, they come on. That's just one authentication and set of credentials is lost. It screws up the whole game so you're absolutely right. I think we've lost the focus on what we're trying to protect. It's the data. It's about the data. And so to look at an architecture and say, can I move this data to a more secure area and reduce the amount of risk, because reduce the access to that data and therefore reduce the risk of loss to that data. That's what our focus should be. And I don't find that in the general zero trust. Zero trust allows
Well,
everybody to come across as long as they're authenticated.
well, yeah, kind of. Zero trust also says I trust no one, right? So I need
Right.
to continuously authenticate,
to
continuously,
to log on to
validate.
the network, though,
So
Darren.
that goes kind of back and forth. No, for me, I take it as anytime I access data or an application, or I need to validate that person. I need to say, do you really have access at this point in time? That's my
Yeah.
perspective of it. Maybe I read it wrong, but I think we are in violent agreement on this. That, hey, the data is critical, and I have to do my best to, what's the right word? I've got to do my best to make sure that the right people have the right data at the right time. But I'm going to throw a big, as an executive, like I've been in the past. I want data. A part of me, especially with data scientists and AI and all this stuff going on, I want the data more accessible to more people, so that we can make better business decisions. So it's almost like you've got this, loggerheads, right, between the business units that are saying we need more data or effective data, and cybersecurity guys like yourself are saying, no, you need to restrict the data to very specific individuals. Is that a conflict, or am I reading that wrong?
No. I think you've got it right, and I'm in total agreement. It's all about the data and the data and the focus on the data. Darren, let me make one more point, and that is, when I
Yeah.
interact with a small company on this, what are you trying to protect? Why are you trying to protect it? What's going to happen to you if you fail? And I identify the information assets. 9 times out of 10, they're located in some software as a service platform,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
outside of zero
Out in
trust,
the
right?
cloud, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so follow the money. It's about follow the money. Where's the money? If your assets are already in Slack or in Salesforce or in GitHub, okay, yeah, what good is zero trust doing you when you have no control over a software as a service environment, and you're putting an
Yeah. Yeah. You're
information asset
absolutely
on
right.
there? Yeah, and that's the logic I think we're missing. If we had our focus on the data, what's important, okay, at that information asset, and we understood where it was processed, stored, or transmitted, okay, and then applied the zero trust theory to that, then we're on track. But wrestling an architecture down to zero trust and then opening up a GitHub and putting your new, your new SDLC project in there, it just doesn't make sense. And yet that's what we are doing.
Yeah. Oh, all right. So this brings up another really important question, and a conflict that I see a lot of organizations having when I work with them, and that is, um, the shared security, or shared responsibility security model that a lot of the cloud service providers are touting. Right? You've got SaaS, right, where our platform where I'm putting my data up there. That's one thing. And then I also have infrastructure and some data
Yeah.
up there as platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. Holy cow, it must be incredibly difficult for organizations to figure out what security posture they have. Or do I just completely abandon these types of services that are out there? What do I do? So Richard, we talked about a little bit about things running in the cloud in SaaS offerings like GitHub or Slack or whatever. What should I do? Should I just abandon those types of things, or how do I now protect?
Oh, Darren, it's cloud is, and these SaaS platforms in cloud are phenomenal things, and they're cost effective for businesses. There's just no, this is our problem. We've run to the cloud. We put our information assets in the cloud. What's missing is, prior to doing that, is a good old fashioned threat assessment, risk analysis. All right, in terms of taking a good look at the asset, understanding the value and the criticality of that asset, and then understanding the risks associated with putting that asset into a Salesforce, a GitHub, or a cloud platform. I remember the first time years and years ago, like 10 years ago, I went to my first cloud conference, and somebody sat up there and they explained what a cloud hosting environment was. And I just sat there and I thought, this changes everything. You don't know, it's on demand. You pull down your asset. You don't know if it's in Buenos Aires or Mexico City or London or Paris, unbelievable. What server? I just made my head spin. And the guy next to me, who was the next speaker, was sound asleep. And I nudged him. I said, hey, did you hear that? And he said, well, it's no big deal. He said, Rich, do you have kids? And I said, no, I don't. Why? And he said, well, if you had kids, it's a lot like taking your children to a daycare center. And I went, okay, and how so? And he said, well, for some parents, you could drop your kids off with the only assurance that, hey, have them back here by 4:00. I want my kids. I'm going to come back by 4:00. I want my kids. And that's okay. But to other parents, they might be interested about who the other kids are, who their children are going to play with. Will strangers be accessing those children? Will they be, playing in rooms with fire and life safety features? And now I got it. I said, okay. He said, so dad is like like children. So and his joke to me was, my mom, she would just say, whatever, I don't care where he is, I'll pick him up at 4. But other parents might think, hey, wait a minute, I'm concerned about who else can access my data on the platform. Who else, in what environment? Will it be hosted on a server that has some proper sysadmin and patches and password, and who accesses these things? So and that all comes down to understanding and doing a risk assessment of your daycare center / cloud platform, and understanding and saying, is that suitable to this data asset? And that's what we're missing. We put all of our assets into our Salesforce and GitHubs, and then we think, oh, geez, maybe we have absolutely no assurance what third parties have access or don't have access to that. Is there logical segmentation to that data? Is there not? And so the thought needs to go up in front. The cloud and Salesforce are great for certain assets, but maybe, just maybe, not your secret sauce recipe or your next hybrid IP if you're a car manufacturer. I mean, you need to think this through and understand what you're trading for on demand, very cheap services that we're finding.
So that brings up an interesting, concept. Daycares. I have a bunch of kids. I got 10 kids. Okay. So we've had our kids in schools and things like that. We send our kids to places that have some kind of assurance of safety because they're regulated. So this goes to the question, and we have in the United States, I don't know about in Europe if they have a GovCloud concept, but in the United States, we have a GovCloud concept, which means that they're checked and audited periodically and fit a certain criteria, right? Because they're regulated and certified.
Yes.
Do you think we need to move in that direction to give some organizations some more assurance that, hey, things are better over here?
It's a start. I'm not pro regulation. For me, if there's no financial incentive for a cloud platform to administer day-to-day routine sysadmin, you're not going to get it. If it's a check, a box to check so they can get their secure cloud stamp of approval, that's what you're going to get. It boggles my mind how
Okay.
managed service providers or cloud providers haven't really embraced security and sold, what they, could market as, a watertight platform, complete logical segmentation, compliance to X, Y, and Z, or ISO compliance platforms, etc. We see this in bits and pieces. So to regulate it and say, it's a must-have, I just until
That doesn't
a
make
service,
sense then, right?
well, exactly, and it's not won't make sense until there's a financial incentive to do so. It's a business. These cloud platforms, every service provider, it's a business, and at the end of the day, if they can't make money on it, they're not going to make money on it. Look at internet service providers. Okay, the internet. This is another completely dodged a bullet in terms of cybersecurity in our industry. No requirement to these are the guys who deliver the malware, the Trojans, the denial of services, the ransomware right to our front door. They're delivering their traffic. You know how easy it would be for them to filter malware to so it doesn't come through your internet service provider connection. They're there. They're like the doorman to the nightclub that is the internet, and they could let the bad elements out. They could be blocking bad bogus sites. They could be stopping denial of service. No, they don't. And you know why? There's no money to be made for that. They make their money in bandwidth, in revenue.
It sounds like there's a possibility of money to be made if someone markets it correctly. Say, right? But is there a indemnification that they're then like, well, we don't want to tout that we're the most secure ISP or the most secure cloud because now we're going to have a target on our back from all of these cyber,
You wouldn't have to do it that way, Darren. Think of just my example of the internet service provider. Wouldn't you pay $5 more a month for an internet service provider that didn't deliver malware to your home PCs?
Yes,
I sure would.
Absolutely.
And that's a promise that's easily kept. Okay, to say, or a denial of service attack, or whatever it is, to be able to say, hey, I pay a couple bucks more for you to give me a clean pipe of bandwidth that doesn't have crap in it, and for you to block bogus websites every time I log on with your connection. Now, how much, to me, that's an easy money maker. They wouldn't have to, it's not like they'd be drawing a target to themselves. And I'll tell you what, if a piece of malware slips through a link that we didn't see or something, we'll give you a credit towards next month. There's an easy financial model to be embraced by an internet service provider that I would run out to pay $5, $10, $20 more. It depends how much you've been hurt by malware in your home devices. But can you imagine?
So let's expand that to cloud service providers then, right? And also these SaaS providers. There is technology. Intel's got some pretty incredible technology for that segmentation.
Yes.
Our confidential computing platforms like SGX and TDX provide that isolation. It is available out there on Azure, and AWS has similar technologies, and Oracle Cloud. But guess what? People aren't willing to pay for it, or it's too difficult to use.
Yep.
So,
and I don't have an answer to that. And so
that's a tough one.
This is where I started to say cloud platforms. I'm not dissing cloud platforms. There are plenty of cloud platforms
it's
that
a problem
provide,
everyone knows about.
But you have to pay for it. Just like I would have to, pay for an additional service not to get, from an internet service provider. There's got to be money in it. So if there's not, then go ahead and leave your child at that daycare center and don't complain when, you've got a problem. Put your data. I have very little tolerance for somebody say, "Oh, I've lost customer data on my cloud platform." The cloud platform's to be, to blame. No, they're not to blame.
No,
you're to blame. You're the one who didn't do the risk assessment and assess that cloud platform as suitable for the sensitivity of that data. It was lost. That's your decision. And just when you said there are plenty of other platform providers out there that could provide a higher level of integrity, of the platform that you're looking for. So it's the buyer's choice, which is absolutely right, and that's the way it should be.
So, all right. So let's move off the platforms and technology back to the process side of things. So, if I'm a small or mid-sized company or an organization, I start with my assessment. You said risk assessment first. Where do I move past that? Or, what from your
Oh
experience,
wow.
and once I do a risk assessment, what's the next step, the low-hanging fruit that organizations can put in place to improve their security profile?
I love that question because the answer is so simple. Let me back up and say risk assessment second. The first thing
Oh,
that any business has to do is understand their risk appetite. Remember,
I
because I
like it.
said cybersecurity is an
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oxymoron. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. So the game is risk management. There are no absolutes in cybersecurity. There are no such thing as a secure computer. So the game, you get up every day, you identify, minimize, and manage the risk. So the first thing you have to understand is what is my appetite for loss? How much loss can I sustain in this business and live to fight another day? If I had a breach tomorrow, if I had a ransomware attack or a denial of service attack or something that just took me out of business, okay, what is the financial impact that I could live with, pay that, whether that's fines or customer complaints, legal costs, fees, whatever, the damage to my reputation that I can live to fight another day. Is that $100,000? Is it $500,000? Is that a million? Is that 10 million? Whatever that is. What's my appetite for a cybersecurity breach? You have to know that first. And then when you understand, hey, you know what? We could take a breach of 100,000. Don't want one, but we could do it. And how about 200? Well, maybe 200, maybe, and find that risk of how much can you sustain without taking a hit on the business. Okay. So that's your appetite. And then there's a little more over there, over that. And that's a tolerance. You can withstand it for a month, 6 months because you're opening up a new office
Okay.
in this location or whatever. But then the final one that has to be understood by everybody in the board is the capacity. What's the amount of a breach that would put us all out of business? Okay, what is that number? Is that £1 million breach? If you're a small company, is it a £100 million breach? And know exactly where the ceiling is. And until you know that, you can write all the policies and do all the risk
It
assessments
doesn't
you want,
matter.
but you'll never have a target to keep you out of harm's way. Right? You need to know your appetite and the capacity. What is the
So,
number of that breach? And
yeah, let's talk about the money thing on this. How do I put a dollar figure on this? That's just I just have a dollar figure out there. If we got a ransomware attack, because how else do you put a dollar on your risk? Is it only tied to ransomware, or is it tied to the cost to get me back to operational? Or what?
it is business disruption. It's got
Okay,
to be tied to the cost. If I suffer a cyber attack that disrupts my business, whether that's disrupts my website and from you taking credit card charges, or disrupts my supply chain or whatever, that would have a direct impact on how much you're going to clear that month as a business. Okay, and that's where you start, is to understand. All right, if our website went down, we could do it for a day and it wouldn't cost us 2 days. We'd start losing, 100,000 a day because we take X number of transactions. So some areas of the business, it's easily done. But at the end of the day, it's about business disruption. If you showed up one morning and you had a ransomware attack and everything was lost to you, you couldn't type in anything, all your files were locked down, you'd understand immediately, okay, how much you lose per day without your IT systems. And if you don't, you really should. If you don't, you don't understand cybersecurity, because that's the ultimate game, is to manage the risk that would happen to you. So if you don't have a figure first and foremost in your head about, my business makes $10 a day or $10 million a day, or somewhere in between, and a cyber attack that disrupted my business for three days could cost me $30 or $30
or
million
$30 million. Yeah,
then
this
you
is
don't know where to start.
this is really fascinating because if you look at the history of business, the risk management that you're talking about goes all the way back into the 1800s,
Yep.
easily.
Exactly.
Right? If my business
Exactly.
is down, if I lose an employee or I lose a horse or if I lose a factory or whatever the case may be. So the fundamentals are very well known. We know these things. We've just
Mhm.
forgotten, it sounds like.
There's very few companies out there that don't have a risk ledger. What are the risks of, fire, flood, locust?
Yeah,
All of this is
exactly.
known. Why isn't cybersecurity? Yeah, it's why haven't we migrated ourselves up to the board level to understand that, hey, cybersecurity is at risk. It's just as bad as losing a horse or losing a factory or having a walkout of my people on strike. Yes, it's risk management 101, specifically cyber risk management. And so I don't understand, because this is not new think. This is, as you say, Darren, this is as old as business itself.
Yeah, no, it is. And I'm glad you're bringing this back up. I think sometimes we get lost, and I say this to CIOs all the time. I say, where are you spending all your time? On infrastructure or on information? Are you the chief infrastructure officer or are you the chief information officer? And we go the same thing. It's too bad that we have a CISO. We should have a risk manager. We should have a C-suite risk manager. That's what we should have, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just to follow up on that, once you identify and have a risk appetite and know your capacity, then you go to step two, which is my risk assessment. And what you're looking for are those risks that exceed your appetite. Those risks, because that's the ones you want to deal with. You don't want to deal with anything that's just a nuisance. You want to be able to stand on the level of your risk appetite and say, I am looking for risks out there that exceed $10 or $100,000 or
That
whatever your
exceed
appetite
that.
is. That's right, and prioritize those risks, and that's where you spend your money. And so, people who have cybersecurity budgets, and I say, how does this cross map back to your risk appetite? And they say, what's a risk appetite? And I said, you're dealing with everything you see on the cybersecurity landscape as if it were an equal threat to your business, and it's
But it's
not.
not.
And it's not. Because you want to focus on those risks that exceed your appetite, and of course that would exceed your capacity, would put you out of business. And you have one of those, and it's too late. And because there's always going to be risk, you're always going to have some kind of malware or some sort of cybersecurity problem. But yeah, I tell you what, as long as it's within your appetite, so what? So
That
what? Just like
that
the risk of fire. You walk into an office, every office still has the risk of fire, but you've put in fire detectors and motion detectors to understand if the building's empty or not. And so you've taken the appropriate measures, but you haven't negated the absolute possibility of fire, just like cybersecurity. You just find your appetite and then you let the rest go and look for what exceeds your appetite. Look for what exceeds your capacity when you do a risk assessment. Therefore, you're focused on the right stuff. That's where you spend your money. But we don't.
I
We
love
don't
this
do it right.
approach. I mean, this is simple and fundamental that we need to get back to. So, hey, Richard, it's been great talking to you today, but we're out of time. So I appreciate your insight. We most certainly have to have you come back on the show so we can talk more about how Gen AI is going to play in all this, and does it open up new vectors? How does that
No,
play in
I
my
got to
risk
sleep tonight.
assessment?
I got to sleep tonight, Darren. Don't bring up AI. I got to get it. I'm not sleeping as it is.
All right. So, Richard, thanks for coming on the show. This has been great.
Thank you. Had a good time. Thank you, Darren. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and embrace the digital revolution.